My girlfriend came home at 2 a.m. smelling like another man's cologne and called it a work dinner full story. I noticed my partner flip their phone face down for the first time in 3 years, and I can't stop thinking about it. M29, F27 together 3 years. I need to write this out because I've been sitting with it for 4 days, and I genuinely don't know if I'm overthinking or if my gut is telling me something real. We've been together for 3 years. Good relationship overall, no major issues, we communicate pretty well. I've never considered myself a jealous or suspicious person, and I think people who know me would agree with that. Last Thursday we were sitting on the couch together, pretty close, just watching something. Her phone was on the cushion between us. A message came in and what happened next took maybe half a second, but I keep replaying it. She glanced at the screen, and before I could register anything at all, she reached over and flipped the phone face down. Smooth, casual, like it was nothing. Then she just kept watching the show. I didn't say anything in the moment because honestly I wasn't sure what I'd even seen, but I kept thinking about it. In 3 years I have never once seen her do that. Our phones are always just around, face up, we're not secretive people. Neither of us goes through each other's phones, but we've also never felt the need to hide them. I brought it up 2 days later as casually as I could. I said something like, "Hey, I noticed the other night you flipped your phone over when a message came in, is everything okay?" She said it was probably just a reflex and changed the subject pretty quickly. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone sent her a meme she didn't want me to see before my birthday. Maybe I'm reading into a half-second moment and building a story around it that isn't there. But I've been with this person for 3 years and I know her habits. That wasn't a habit I recognized. TLDR, partner of 3 years flipped their phone face down when a message came in for the first time ever. When I asked about it casually, she brushed it off. Can't tell if I'm overthinking or if this is worth a real conversation. Okay, so that was my original post. I put it up mostly to get out of my own head, honestly. I didn't expect it to blow up the way it did. I got hundreds of comments, split pretty evenly between people telling me to relax and people telling me to run. The most common response was some version of, one data point doesn't mean anything, watch for a pattern. So that's what I did. I watched. And I'm back now with a full update because the pattern showed up and then some. Let me fill in the parts I glossed over in the original post, because context matters. Her name is Cassie. I'm Ryan. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming party 3 years ago, one of those parties where you end up talking to one person in the kitchen for 3 hours, and then suddenly the party is over and you've completely ignored everyone else. That was us. She was funny in this dry, understated way that I wasn't expecting, and she had this quality of being completely present in a conversation, like she was actually listening rather than just waiting for her turn to talk. I was gone before the night was over. We moved in together about 18 months in, which I know some people think is fast. For us it felt right. We both had our own rhythms, but we fit together without too much friction. She's a graphic designer, works remotely for a branding agency. I'm in project management at a mid-sized construction firm, so I'm out of the house most of the day. Our place is a 2-bedroom apartment. She uses the second bedroom as her home studio, and our life together is, by most reasonable measures, a good one. We cook dinner together most nights. We have a standing Saturday morning tradition of going to a specific diner 4 blocks away and doing the crossword together even though we're both terrible at it. We don't have kids, no engagement yet though it's been discussed in that comfortable, low-pressure way where it feels like a matter of when rather. Before that Thursday on the couch, the word that would have come to mind to describe our relationship was easy. Not boring, easy. Comfortable without being stale. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what comes later. After I posted and people told me to watch for a pattern, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. And I want to be really precise here. I was not snooping. I was not going through her things. I was just paying attention to the person I shared my life with a level of focus I hadn't previously applied. That distinction mattered to me then, and it still does, even though I've had people argue otherwise. The first thing I noticed was the phone itself. Cassie's phone had always been a background object in our apartment, charging on the nightstand, sitting face up on the coffee table, left in the kitchen while she worked out. Within about a week of the couch incident, I realized it was moving with her. Not obviously, not in a way she was advertising, but it was no longer just sitting around. It was in her pocket, or in her hand, or in the studio with the door mostly closed. I noticed because its absence from the usual spots was its own kind of presence. The second thing I noticed was that she started working later. Cassie has always kept pretty disciplined hours for someone who works from home. She's good at keeping work in the studio and leaving it there. But suddenly she was staying at her desk until 9, sometimes 10 at night, and when I'd knock and ask if she was coming out, she'd say she was behind on a project and she'd be out soon, which I had no reason to disbelieve. Designers have deadlines. Work gets heavy. I didn't push. The third thing was subtler and harder to articulate. There's this specific way Cassie engages with me when she's fully present, a kind of warmth that shows up in small physical things, the way she'll lean her head against my shoulder without thinking about it, or reach over and fix my collar without being asked. It's unconscious, I think. Something she does without deciding to, and it started to feel like that had been dialed back slightly. Not gone, just reduced. Like she was slightly further away, even when she was right next to me. I sat on all of this for another week. I know that sounds passive, but I kept coming back to the comment that had stuck with me most from my original post, which was, a single data point is noise. A pattern is signal. Wait for the pattern. I was waiting, and I was hoping I was wrong. Then came the Friday night that changed things. Cassie told me on a Tuesday that she had a work dinner on Friday. Her agency was flying in some clients from out of state, and the whole remote team was getting together in person for the first time in a while. She gave me the information naturally, at the kitchen table over pasta, just factored it into the week's schedule the way you do when you live with someone. I said that sounded fun. She said she was a little nervous, because she'd only ever met most of her coworkers on video calls. Normal conversation, nothing strange. On Friday she got dressed up, which she doesn't do often. She looked genuinely great, this burgundy-wrapped dress I like, her hair down, a little more effort than usual. She kissed me on the cheek on her way out, said she probably wouldn't be too late, and left. She got home at almost 2 in the morning. I wasn't asleep. I told myself I was just watching TV, but I know I was waiting, and I heard the key in the lock and checked my phone and it was 1:47 a.m. She came in quietly, so I was awake and said, "Hey, you didn't have to wait up." She smelled like wine and someone else's cologne. I want to be very specific about that. I know how it sounds. I know the word cologne in this context reads like a script, but I am telling you what I noticed, and I noticed that. It wasn't overwhelming, it wasn't drenched in it. It was a trace. The kind of thing that happens when someone has been in close proximity to another person for a long time. A hug maybe, or something more than a hug. I didn't say anything about it. I asked how the dinner was. She said it was good, exhausting, lots of catching up. The clients were fine. She went and changed and got into bed and fell asleep pretty quickly. I lay there next to her in the dark and thought about the cologne and the 1:47 a.m. and the phone that had been moving with her everywhere for 2 weeks. The next morning she was normal. Made coffee, asked what I wanted to do with the weekend, was warm and engaged in a way that almost made me feel crazy. Because how do you bring up, "I smelled something on you last night," without sounding like a character in a bad movie? How do you say, "You were out until 2 in the morning, and I can't stop thinking about it," to someone who is standing in your kitchen, in her pajamas asking if you want to go to the diner? I didn't say anything that Saturday. We went to the diner. We did the crossword badly. She laughed at something I said and rested her hand on mine across the table, and it was, on its surface, a completely normal morning. I called my friend Derek that afternoon while Cassie was in the studio. Derek and I have been friends since college. He is blunt in the way that only people who genuinely like you can afford to be, and I needed blunt. I told him everything. The phone flip, the pattern of small changes, the work dinner, the late return, the cologne, I laid it all out. There was a pause and then Derek said, "Okay, first question, is it possible you're projecting? Like, is there anything going on with you right now that would make you want to find a problem?" I thought about it honestly. I said no, not that I could identify. Second question, he said. Is it possible she just had a long work dinner with people she doesn't see often, had a few too many drinks, and someone hugged her goodbye? Because that is a very ordinary explanation for all of what you just described. I said yes, it was possible. Then why are you on the phone with me, instead of talking to her? I said because I didn't know how to start the conversation, without sounding accusatory. Derek made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. Ryan, man, you are building a case in your head on circumstantial evidence. You know what actually solves this? Talking to her. Not watching her phone, not sniffing her jacket, not calling me, her, you talk to her. He wasn't wrong, and I knew it, but I also hadn't told him everything yet. What I hadn't told Derek, what I hadn't told anyone, was that 3 days before the work dinner, I had been in the kitchen when Cassie's laptop was open on the counter, and a notification had popped up on the screen before the screensaver kicked in. It was a message preview in what looked like Instagram DMs. Just a fragment, the way notification previews cut off, but I read it before I could decide not to. The preview said, "Can't stop thinking about last." And then the screen went dark. I have turned those 6 words over in my mind approximately 10,000 times since then. Can't stop thinking about last. Last what? Last night, last week, last year, last Tuesday. The sentence ends in nothing and my brain has been filling in the blank with every possible thing that fits, and most of what fits is bad. I didn't tell Derek about the notification because I felt weird about it. Not because I'd done anything wrong, the laptop was open, the notification appeared, I didn't hack anything or go looking for it. But I knew that once I said those words out loud to another person, they became real in a different way. As long as they were just in my head, I could still pretend I'd misread them, or that they were about something completely innocent. Saying them to Derek would close that door. I said them to Derek. He was quiet for a moment. Then, okay, that's a little different. Yes. Do you know who it was from? No, it went dark before I could see. So it could still be nothing. It could be her friend talking about a movie they watched. It could be literally anything. It could be, I said. He understood what I wasn't saying, but your gut doesn't think it is. No, my gut doesn't think it is. We talked for another 20 minutes, and at the end of it Derek's advice was the same as it had been at the start, talk to her. He said it more gently this time, but the conclusion was the same. He also said something I've come back to since, which was, whatever you find out, you're going to have to live with how you handled this. So handle it in a way you can live with. I decided I was going to talk to her that night. I spent the whole afternoon in my own head, rehearsing, dismantling the rehearsal, starting over. I wanted to be direct without being accusatory. I wanted to ask questions without making accusations. I wanted to give her the chance to tell me something I didn't yet know before I brought up the things I did know. Dinner was quiet. Not uncomfortably quiet, just quiet. She was in her head too, I thought, though I might have been projecting. We cleaned up together without talking much and then we were both on the couch, the same configuration as that first Thursday 3 weeks ago, and I turned the TV off and said, "Hey, can we talk?" She looked at me, and something moved across her face, something brief and difficult to name before she said, "Yeah, of course." I said I'd been feeling like something was off for the past few weeks, and I needed to understand if I was imagining it, or if there was something she wanted to tell me. She said carefully, "What do you mean off?" I said I meant between us. A distance I wasn't used to, small things that felt different. I said I wasn't accusing her of anything, I just wanted to check in honestly because I cared about her and about us, and I'd rather have an uncomfortable conversation than sit with a feeling I couldn't name. She was quiet long enough that I counted the seconds in my head. 4, 5, 6. Then she said, "There's someone I've been talking to." The apartment was very quiet. I said, "Talking to?" She said, "His name is Garrett, he's a photographer. I met him at a networking event about 2 months ago. We've been talking online DMs. It started off just professional, but it's not professional anymore." I asked her what not professional meant. She looked at the floor. "It's emotional, we talk about things, personal things, nothing physical has happened. The dinner last Friday was a work dinner, that part was true, but he was there. He was one of the clients. And we talked all night and I got home at 2 in the morning and I know how that looks." "The cologne," I said mostly to myself. She looked up. "What?" "You smelled like someone else's cologne." She absorbed that. She said, "We hugged goodbye, that was it. I am telling you the truth when I say nothing physical happened. But I know that's not the whole point." No, it wasn't the whole point. What followed was 2 hours that I don't have the emotional bandwidth to recreate in full detail. We talked, and then we argued, and then we talked again. She told me that she wasn't sure what she felt, that she hadn't intended for it to become what it had become, that she'd told herself it was harmless right up until the point where she knew it wasn't. She said she was sorry. She said it multiple times, in multiple ways, and I believe she meant it each time. She also said something that landed hard, that she didn't feel like she had done anything irreparable, and that she wanted to fight for us if I was willing. I asked her about the message preview I'd seen on the laptop, the "can't stop thinking about" last fragment. She closed her eyes briefly. "He sent that after the dinner. He was saying he couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. I didn't respond to it." "Why didn't you respond?" "Because I was sitting next to you on the couch when he sent it, and I didn't know how to." And there it was. The message wasn't what the couch incident had been. She hadn't flipped the phone over that night. She'd just come home and fallen asleep. The couch incident, the original thing that started all of this, had been Garrett too, a different night, an earlier message. She confirmed it without me asking, like she knew I needed to hear it. She said it had been going on for about 6 weeks at that point, the flipped phone, and she was aware that it was a first and that she'd been hoping I hadn't noticed. I had noticed. That was the whole thing. I had noticed a half-second gesture and I had been right. I asked her what she wanted. Not what she was sorry for, not what she wished she'd done differently, what she actually wanted now, going forward. She said she wanted us. She said she'd gotten scared, that she wasn't sure of what, that maybe the closeness of our relationship had started to feel like pressure she didn't know how to name, and she'd found something in talking to Garrett that felt uncomplicated in a way she hadn't been handling well. She said she knew how that sounded. She said she wasn't trying to justify it, just explain it. I told her I needed to think. I slept in the guest room that night. Not dramatically, I didn't pack a bag or slam a door, I just said I needed space to think, and she said she understood, and I went and lay down in the dark in the room that smelled like her studio, and stared at the ceiling until it was light outside. Here's the thing about what she described, the emotional affair, the talking, the shared personal things with someone else, that I've been wrestling with ever since. It is a real betrayal, I know that. I'm not minimizing it by looking for a bright side. She let someone into a part of her inner life that was supposed to be ours, and she hid it, and she sat next to me for 6 weeks with the secret and flipped her phone over on the couch and pretended it wasn't happening. That is a real thing that she did. But it is also not what I feared it was. In those worst nights, in the 2 weeks between the couch and the conversation, I had constructed a much darker version of this story in my head. A version with hotels and lies with real architecture and a marriage-ending physical betrayal. What I got was smaller than that and more complicated than that, and in some ways harder to know what to do with. I talked to my older brother, Nathan, the following week. Nathan is 41, married with 2 kids, and I figured if anyone could give me a grounded perspective it was him. I laid the whole thing out. He listened carefully. Then he said, "Can I be honest even if it's not what you want to hear?" I said yes. He said, "You went weeks without talking to her. You were watching her habits, tracking her phone, cataloging evidence in your head. She had an emotional connection with someone she shouldn't have, yeah, but you basically ran a covert investigation on your girlfriend instead of just asking her what was wrong. I'm not saying you're the bad guy. I'm saying you both handled this badly." I told him that felt like a false equivalence. He said, "Maybe, but she told you the truth when you asked her directly. Have you considered what you would have found if you just asked her 3 weeks earlier when you first noticed something was off, before it had time to compound?" I hadn't, or I had, and I didn't like where it went, which is probably the same thing. Nathan wasn't saying Cassie was right. He was clear about that. He said what she'd done was a real breach of trust, and I had every right to be upset. But he also said that my way of handling it, the silent watching, the evidence gathering, the weeks of internal case building, wasn't exactly a model of healthy communication either. He said we'd both chosen avoidance in different ways, and we'd both let something small metastasize into something much larger than it needed to be. That was hard to hear. It was also, I think, true. We've been in couples therapy for the past 3 weeks. The therapist's name is Dr. Sandra Webb, and she has the particular skill of asking questions that feel simple until you actually try to answer them. In our second session, she asked Cassie why she thought she'd sought out the connection with Garrett, and Cassie talked for a while about feeling like she'd been losing herself slightly in the relationship, that she'd been afraid to say that to me because she didn't want to hurt me, so instead of saying it she'd found it somewhere else. Dr. Webb then turned to me and asked what I'd felt in the weeks before the couch incident. And I sat there and realized for the first time that I had noticed something had felt slightly off with Cassie even before the phone flip. I had registered it and set it aside. I hadn't asked. I hadn't asked. That's the thing that keeps turning over in my head now, even as things between Cassie and me are slowly and carefully being rebuilt. If I had turned to her 3 weeks before the couch incident, when I'd first registered that faint sense of distance, and said, "Hey, is everything okay? Are we okay?" Would any of the rest of this have happened? If I had created the space for her to say she was feeling something she didn't know how to name, would she have reached for Garrett at all? I don't know, I genuinely don't know. And Dr. Webb would tell me that counterfactuals aren't especially useful, which she has, in almost exactly those words. Garrett is out of the picture. Cassie blocked him, and to her agency's credit, he's not someone she'll have ongoing professional contact with. I don't know what he knows, or what he thought was happening, or what he's doing now, and I've made a deliberate choice not to think about it because that way lies a very dark rabbit hole. Cassie and I are still together. We're working at it in the way that working at it actually means, not a montage, not a clean redemption arc, just two people sitting across from a therapist twice a week and trying to be more honest with each other than they were before. Some days it feels like we're getting somewhere real. Other days I'll be doing something completely ordinary and it'll just hit me again, the cologne, the dark laptop screen, the smoothness of that phone flip, and I have to breathe through it. She asked me last week if I trusted her. We were walking home from the diner. We've kept the Saturday tradition, I think because abandoning it would have felt like giving up something I wasn't ready to give up, and she asked it without preamble, the way she asks difficult things. I said I was getting there, that it was a daily decision rather than a feeling that had come back all at once. She nodded and said that was fair, and held my hand the rest of the way home. Here's where I've ended up. For anyone who's followed this from the beginning, I saw something. A half-second gesture on a couch on a Thursday night. My gut told me it meant something, and it did. My gut did not exaggerate or fabricate. There was a real thing happening that I had no language for yet, and my instincts found the edge of it before my conscious mind did. And at the same time, I spent 3 weeks building a case instead of having a conversation. I cataloged and watched and waited and suffered quietly when I could have just turned to her and said something feels different, talk to me. I told myself I was waiting for a pattern, for enough evidence for the right moment. But I think at least part of it was that I was afraid of what I'd find, that the watching felt safer than the knowing. Cassie had an emotional affair. She hid it. She let a stranger into parts of her life that should have been mine, and she sat next to me for 6 weeks with that and said nothing. That is the thing she did. And I'm sitting here wondering if the way I handled it, the silent monitoring, the internal investigation, the weeks of watching her from a careful distance, was the behavior of someone protecting himself or the behavior of someone so afraid of vulnerability that he turned his own relationship into a surveillance operation. I don't have a clean answer for that. I'm not sure one exists. I just know that a half-second gesture on a couch cracked something open that neither of us had been looking at, and that sometimes the smallest things are the truest signals we get, and the real question isn't whether we notice them, but what we choose to do when we do. I'm still working on that part.